Hello and welcome to Tiffanys Crafts. This video is how to make a shamrock granny square hat. This version is the long version, and I do have a shorter version on how to make this hat on my YouTube page, and I also have a long version and a short version on how to make the shamrock granny square. These are extra videos that I have on my YouTube page, Tiffanys Crafts, that can help you with this project if you need a more detailed review on how to make a triangle, how to make a magic circle, how to make sides and shell stitches, and how to whip stitch the squares together, and how to increase and decrease stitches. And these are the supplies and techniques that you will be using for this hat, and the type of yarn that I used. Now, this is the pattern that you will be using for the triangle granny square, which is round 1, and how to create the stem. And I also have later on in the video more detailed explanation on how to make this triangle granny and the stem. Now this is how to do round 2 and round 3 for the corner and the sides for the pattern that you will use. And this is the pattern for the brim. It's for a small brim pattern and a large brim pattern, and you can choose one or the other, and both brim patterns have 4 rounds, and it has an optional to attach a pipe cleaner to the brim to make the brim more flexible. These are the granny squares that we're going to be making. This is a shamrock granny square. And the way that we're going to be making this is that this shamrock granny square is actually a triangle. The shamrock is the green part here, and this right here is your triangle. And then we have a stem going down here. And then we're going to turn this triangle into a square by doing round 2, which goes across here, and then round 3 is square. And the website's links from my YouTube page, tutorials can help you with this project. How to make a magic circle, and how to make sides and squares. So the way that we're going to begin this is we're going to make a magic circle, and then we're going to chain 3. That chain 3 is going to count as your first double crochet, and then we're going to work 2 double crochet into the ring. From there, we're going to chain 3, and then we're going to do 3 double crochet into the ring. And then we're going to repeat that one more time, and then we're going to slip stitch at the top. And that's how we're going to make this. When you're going to be ready to slip stitch at the top, that's when you're going to create your stem. And this is what the stem looks like here. And the stem is actually 3 chain of 3, and then you're going to single crochet into that chain. Then you're going to knot it and cut it. And then you're going to begin with a new color if you want, or you can continue with the green. I kind of like the new color because it shows the shamrock more. And then you're going to do your 4 corners, one here, 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 and here, your 4 corners. And how are you going to make that into a 4 corners if you have 3? Triangle. You just have a triangle right here with 3 corners. And the way that you do that is you're going to make right here a corner inside of the shamrock on the other side of the stem here, and you're going to make a corner here. And that's how you make the 4 corners. Then when your 4 corners are done, you're going to slip stitch, and then you're going to begin your 3rd row, which is a corner, a side, and a corner, a side, corner, side, corner, side, and corner. And then if you wanted this to be larger, you would just repeat this 3rd round, except for you would put an addition 2 sides here. Wherever you have a side here, you're going to make 2 sides for your next round. So each round would have additional sides. Then when you're done, you want to leave a long tail here. You don't want to cut that, because that tail is going to help with putting your granny squares together. Now this hat that I have here is granny square hat. And it's made exactly like how we're going to do the shamrock. We're going to put all the squares together. You can use a whip stitch to do that, and then a crocheted brim. Now when looking at a granny square, it's going to have 4 corners. Every granny square has 4 corners. Here, here, and here, and there. Where these holes are, that's where your corners are. And you're going to have, of course, a circle in the middle. And the difference between this and your triangle squares, that you're going to have 3 corners here. And your corners are here, 1, 2, 3. But you're going to have here a stem. So you can see the difference between a triangle and a square, granny square, and what they look like. So we're going to start with a magic ring. And I'm using the green. If you're enjoying this music, this is my own music. It's called Easter Praise Harp Music, Scenic 4K Stereo. And this is on my main page, Tiffany Juliet. I have many videos of music that is very nice to listen to while you're crocheting. So we're going to start with a magic circle. And again, you can always watch my video on how to make a magic circle. Okay, and then we're going to chain 3. And that counts as our first double crochet. And then we're going to work 2 double crochets into this ring. And I have many tutorial videos on my YouTube page on how to do stitches. Okay. So we have 3 double crochets in the circle so far. Now we're going to chain 3. And now we're going to do 3 double crochet into the ring. So I have just finished this triangle. And remember that you're going to want to repeat the chain 3 and then 3 double crochet into the ring. I didn't show that last part. And this is what it looks like when it's done. And I had made the 3 crocheted for the stitch, and then I single crocheted into here, into the chain, and then I did a single crochet up into here past the stitch to lock it in place and to move the stitching closer to the next corner. And so now I have just put on some white yarn. I'm using alpaca, a touch of alpaca, and I am getting ready to do the granny squares, the corners. I'm going to do the corners and the 3, and then I'm going to add 1 more corner to add 4 corners total, which is round 2 of this project. So I am going to cut this. This is not my working yarn, the green, anymore, because we've switched over to white. And if you have any questions on how to do granny sides or corners, look at my videos on Tiffanys Crafts. I have a few on there on how to do sides and corners, which explains this a little bit better. Okay, so what we're going to be doing here is the 4 corners, this row here, which is row 2. So we're going to do this corner, this one, this corner, and this corner. And you notice that again that we have 3. If this is our little shamrock, we only have 3 corners here, 1, 2, 3, but we have to make it into 4 to make it into a square. So we're going to add another corner right here on the side of the stem, and that's how we're going to get the 4 corners. So it's going to look like that. It's going to be smaller. This square is 3 rows, rounds. So that's how we're going to do that. And let's start with, we're going to chain 1. Now we're not going to work in here, which is normally what you would think that you would make your first corner. We're going to do that later. And if you're enjoying these beautiful pictures, these are my flag irises that grow in my garden, and it's on the video on Tiffany's, my main page, Tiffany Juliet, which is called Listen to My St. Patrick's Day Celtic Meditation 2. Harp music, Bible verses, ASMR, sleep, study, wedding. And all these photos I took of myself in my garden. So I'm going to work my way up into the corner. I'm going to work my way up into this corner. And the way I'm going to do that is just slip stitching into the stitches that I had previously done. And I'm going to work the green yarn that I had trimmed off to give it a nice finish. I remember when I took that picture of the monarch butterfly. It was a beautiful sunny day, and I had been growing milkweed. I think it was in the milkweed was its 3rd year growing in the garden. And I had seen that butterfly on that flower, and I thought, I've got to take a photo of that. I'm glad that I did. So I have worked my way through 2 stitches. Now you can go all the way up to this corner if you want, or not. I'm not going to. I'm just going to do it on the first 2 stitches. And we're going to do our corners, which is 3 double crochet, 2 chain, and then 3 double crochet. We're going to do that in all of the corners. And we are using U.S. terminology. Okay, we've done our 3 double crochet, and now we're going to do 2 chain. Those are my domestic ducks. Aren't they cute? That was the day that they were enjoying the pond. And I have a video on my website, Tiffany Juliet, called Taking Care of Domestic Ducks in Winter and in Spring. If you would like to see more videos of my ducks. They're crested ducks. They're real cute. They have those feathers on top of their heads. Actually, they had come to adopt me. I didn't adopt them at all. Okay, so we have the first corner done on here. And I'm going to chain 1 before I go to the next corner. And we're going to repeat it. We're going to do 3 double crochet, which is actually a shell. And then we're going to do a chain of 2, and now we're going to do another shell, which is just 3 double crochet. A shell is always 3 double crochet, unless if you wanted the shell bigger. So we're going to work on doing another corner. So we have 2 corners done, corner here and a corner here. And there's my other ducks, the crested ones. Isn't he cute? I had two crested and a rowan duck and a beautiful white one with blue eyes. Okay, so we have 2 corners, and then we're going to be working into the next corner, which is right here. And we're going to chain 1, and we're just going to work right into the corner. And we're going to repeat this pattern of a shell, 2 chain, and then a shell. Okay, so we've done the shell, which was 3 double crochet, and then we're going to do 2 chain of 2, and then 3 more double crochet. And if I'm going too fast or if I'm going too slow, you can change the speed in the settings at the bottom of the video. Okay, now we're getting ready to make another corner. And this is we've finished all 3, making all 3 corners, but we need to make a 4th corner. So we're going to be working on that now. And we're going to be working on the side of the stem, inside of the shamrock. So we're going to make that, and you're going to have 2 choices here, to make it inside of here or to make it right in here. And I'm going to make it right here. I always do it right here. Because you're naturally going to see a part where the top of the stem is, and that's where you want to make that. So we're just going to make this as how we always did for our corners, which is a shell, chain of 2, and another shell. Okay, so we just finished our shell, and now we're going to do a chain of 2. That chain of 2 is what makes the corner look square. Okay, now we're going to be doing another shell, which is just 3 double crochet. Okay, so now we have gotten our 4th corner done. And I usually pull the stem out a little bit. You see, the stem is not connected. Now, if you wanted to, when you're done with making this round, you could put a little stitch in here to connect the shelf, stitch it from here to these 2 stitches if you wanted it to be very secure, but I'm not doing that with mine. Okay, so we have our 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now we're going to find the chain of 3 that we began. So this is where it's located, 1, 2, and 3. This is my beautiful garden in the winter time. So we're going to find the chain of 3 and we're going to do a slip stitch. And we are done with the round 2. And this is what it's going to look like. I keep pulling this out, and I keep taking this corner and making it not so fanned out by trying to expose this green part a little bit more, so that you can see the 3 leaves on the shamrock. And there is your round 2. And so we are going to do round 3. If you like this song's called Danny Boy. I played that on my harp. And this picture was taken in Pikes Peak, Colorado Springs, Colorado. So we're going to be doing round 3, and round 3 is going to have shells in it. Sides. We're going to have sides in it. Side is a shell. So remember, a corner is shell, 2, chain of 2, and another shell. And that's how we get this look here. And then it's called Danny Boy. I played that on my harp. And this picture was taken in Pikes Peak, Colorado Springs, Colorado. So we're going to be doing round 3, and round 3 is going to have shells in it. Sides. We're going to have sides in it. Side is a shell. So remember, a corner is shell, 2, chain of 2, and another shell. And that's how we get this look here. And then when we're going to do the side, it's just 1 shell. Remembering that a shell is 3 double crochet. So we're going to have a corner that's going to be right here. And then in the space here, we're going to have a shell and a corner. And then in the space here, we're going to have a shell in the space right here. And then a corner. And then we're going to have a shell down at the bottom where the stem is, another corner, a shell here, and the top of our granny square is right here. The round is right here. So this would be a good time to put a stitch marker here, or to just put a piece of thread here to remind you that this is the beginning of your round, because it will help you so you don't forget. It's easy to do. So I always have to put a stitch marker in or a piece of thread to remind me. So we're going to begin this with creating a corner. So we are just going to wrap around our hook, which is a 5.00 H/8, and we're going to start with another corner. Oh, these are my domestic ducks. They are so cute. They come right up to my door and look in the window every day when they want to be fed. They're pretty tame. They are wild though. Okay, so we've done 3 shells, and then we've done 1 shell, which is 3 DC, and then we're going to do, we just did 2 chain, and now we're going to do 3 more. DC is abbreviated for double crochet. Those little geese that you see here, they were only a day old when that picture was taken. They were checking out my daffodils. They certainly do like them. They are so cute. Okay, so now we're getting ready to do a side. And I always like to at least do 1 single crochet after I finish a corner. It just gives it a better look. And then I'm going to do the shell in this hole right here, right in here. And I do have tutorials on how to do a shell and how to do a corner. Okay, so we have our shell done, our first shell, and now we're going to do another corner. And we're going to do the corner right here in this hole. And remember that hole is where we had done the chain of 2 in the previous round, which I had mentioned earlier, that gives you the square look. So we're going to do a corner. Okay, so we have finished our corner, and now we're going to do a side. And we're going to do the side right here. We're doing the sides in between the corners of the last round. So if you look at this here, there's a corner here and a corner here. So we know we're going to do our side right here in this hole here. And our side is just a shell, which is 3 double crochet. Okay, so we have done a side and 2 corners, and now we're going to do another corner in here. That is my butterfly garden in spring. It's our alliums, which are bulbs that come up every year. Those bloom in May or June. Okay, now we want to do a side, which is going to be right here where the stem is. And this is about the time when you want to decide if you want to sew this, the end of the stem or not. You can incorporate that in with the side if you want, or you can do it separate, or you can just let it be, leave it like that. I'm not going to sew that in. I kind of like the look of it not being sewn in. So that's up to you, what one you prefer. I'm using a touch of alpaca and cream. That's the yarn that I'm using. I really like this material. Okay, so we have corner, side, corner, corner, side, corner, side. Now if you get lost, because I didn't put in the thread to show me where my end of my row is, what you can do is you can look at this and you can see that this isn't straight across. It's kind of like, you can see that this is shorter than this part, so you know to keep on going until you reach here. So my finger was in the way here. So you see that this side is shorter than this, so then you know that just keep on going, and then right there's the end of your round, which is actually, when you're working on this granny square, the side of it is the end of your round, not the top, because the top is right here. That's kind of tricky. So we're going to do another corner. So we are finishing up the last of this granny square, the Shamrock granny square, and we had finished the side. Now we're going to do the corner. I'm going to make a hat out of this granny square. I've made several granny squares. The Shamrock granny square. And then I'm going to put them together. Okay, then we're going to do one more side and then we're done with this. I'm going to put this side in this hole right here, because that's the most available space to put the side in. Those are my forget-me-nots that are on the computer screen in the mound where my garden is with the daffodils. I mostly have white daffodils in that mound. Okay, so we are at the end of this round and we're going to look for the chain of 3, just right here. 1, 2, and 3. And we're going to do a slip stitch in there. And we're done with our granny square. And again, we're going to keep a long tail on here so we can use that for putting the granny squares together to make a hat, which I will use whip stitch to put the sew them together. So there's our granny square that we just made. So today we are working on putting the granny squares together. And as you can see with this granny square hat that I made, where you see this stitching right here is where I had done the whip stitch. And the stitches do show. As you can see, with this square, the whip stitch goes across here, up around here, around here, it goes around the whole perimeter of the hat. And with this hat, I have all the granny squares sewn together with a bright white. I have one granny square on top. With this hat, I had made the top granny square larger than the other granny squares. So that's up to you if you want to make it larger, but when you do have this top granny square larger, you will have some puckering when you are whip stitching the top to all the other granny squares on the sides. And then we have a brim on the bottom. you will also see the seam on the back side as well. So you want to consider if you want your seams on your granny squares to show. And if you don't want it too obvious, then you will want to use the same colored yarn as the main color of your granny squares. On this hat, I used the bright white for the granny squares, and so I went with the stitching with the same color. And it is a very cute hat. This one is a sunburst granny square, and then on this hat here I did is a granny square with a little flower on it, and it is just your corners that make it look like a little flower. And I had used the same technique, putting the granny squares together with whip stitch, and you can see the stitching in here. And I believe that I used the same yarn for both hats, the white, and it's got the same brim. This brim's a little bit bigger than the other hat. So with my Shamrock granny square hat that I'm making, I pinned all of the squares together using my preferred tool to doing that, which is just little stitch markers. And so I do have another video online, which is a long version of how to put these squares together. Basically, I'm using my yarn needle, and the top of my granny square is actually the side of the granny square. And that's the way that I was making these. So I have it knotted here. And I use the working yarn, and I cut a very long tail so I could use that tail to put the granny squares together. Now you don't have to do that. You can just cut your yarn short and then use a different colored yarn if you want, or the same color. And because the top of my granny square is here, and it's almost on the side, but I'm putting these closer up together, and I have to sew them up higher. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to sew going up these V's up to the very top of where the chain of 3 is for the granny square. And then I'm going to whip stitch the top of this granny square to the top of the first granny square. And that's usually how I begin that. And then I'm just going to whip stitch all the way down to the chain of 3, which is at the bottom. So it's going to be your bottom stitch. You can see that I have them together with stitch markers. And that is how I'm going to accomplish this. And then I reserved a granny square for the top. And when I have all these granny squares sewn together, and it's very important to sew them not right side up, but on the inside of it. After I have that done, I'm going to put the two ends together, and I'm going to sew that. And of course, again, I'm not going to be doing it right side up, but inside out. And when I have that done, it's going to look like a circle. It's going to look like a perimeter. And you could use that just as a head on top of your head to go over your ears, to keep your ears warm if you wanted to. But if you wanted to make a closed hat out of this, after you sew the two ends together, you're going to sew this on. And you can see that this is going to be smaller. This granny square is much smaller than the perimeter of the whole hat. And so you're going to sew this directly onto this hat when you have this completed. And it's not that hard at all, and I'll show you how to do that. And if you need some extra help with this, I do have a tutorial video on how to do this online on my YouTube page, Tiffanys Crafts, and it's much more detailed than what I'm going to be showing you in this video. So I am getting ready to go to the top. I'm working on the second granny square that I have pinned together, and I'm sewing the second one to the first one because I have the long yarn on the second one, and the long yarn on the first one's on the other side of the granny square. So that's why I'm doing the second one and whip stitching it to the first one. And I'm going to be whip stitching on the back loops only. That's just my preferred way of doing the whip stitch with granny squares. So I'm going to work my way up to the top. I also like to do this method when making dowels, when loom knitting dowels, working my way up and when sewing the legs together. Okay, so we're at the top now, and we're getting ready to sew it to the first granny square. Oh, if you're enjoying my music, it's called Listen to My St. Patrick's Day Celtic Meditation 2, harp music, Bible verses, ASMR, sleep, study, and wedding. That was a video that I made. That's on my main page, Tiffany Juliet, which is my harp music. Okay, so we're going to be putting these two together, and it's going to look like this when it's sewed. But we're working with the back loops only. So we'll start with putting our yarn needle in the back loop, and we're going to look at this, and we're going to look for the chain of 3 that I made when I was making this square. The chain of 3 is right here, where I have my yarn needle, and I'm going to put my yarn needle on the back loop. I want to look at it and make sure that it's even with. You always want to make sure that your squares are even. So you always want to make sure that your squares are even and that they look good, so then they lay flat and they lay nice with each other. So when you're sewing the top, it looks nice. So I usually like to sew it right at the corner of the first corner where that chain is at. So I'd be doing it about right there. do whip stitch, I always do it and sew it in the same direction. I'm not sewing it back and forth, but just going in one direction, usually just that way. There are many different ways to sew your granny squares together if you're making a hat or a blanket. And then when you're done, you're going to want to knot it. Also, it would be advisable to knot it at a light knot at the top and a light knot at the bottom. Okay, now we're getting to where stitch marker is, which is the last one. And if you don't think that your squares are even, you could pull on the square a little bit and to shape it more. Or you could just take out the stitching and do it over if you wanted to. A lot of times the squares just need to be shaped. While you're sewing it, you just want to tug on it, make sure that it's like I'm tugging on the second one a little bit. Now, it looks like that we're almost at the end here, but for my hat, I like to completely close this up so there's no gap here, because it really helps when creating the brim. You don't necessarily want a gap here, and especially when working with the top of the hat. See, I have this closed here between these two squares. So when I am sewing the top granny square to all of these squares, it's got a nice look to it. That's done pretty good, but I'm going to close it even more by going to the next stitch over on this side and closing it again, just to make sure that that is just really sewn in good and that it looks even. Okay, so we have the first one done. We have sewn the second square to the first, and I'm going to make a very light knot to knot it. You can do any type of knot that you prefer. I'm just going to do my preferred method of knotting it. And there's my ducks. Those are my wild ones. You want to get that knot as close as possible, and when you have this all done, you're going to take these ends and you're going to want to weave it up into this area or here, and make sure that you work on the back side, like how I have this yarn needle on the back. You don't want to take the yarn and go all the way through across like that, because then you might not give it a good look. So I always like to go on the back, and you don't have to go across. You can use this whole working yarn. You can cut the working yarn and then just weave in a few ends, just so it has a nice finished look. Okay, so I'm going to do that with all of these squares, and I will see you at the end when I am ready to put the two squares together like this. Basically, we're going to be turning it inside out like that to sew them, to whip stitch them. Okay, so we are going to sew this together using the whip stitch on the back loops. If you wanted to, if you want to do it, or you can do it on all the loops. I'm going to do it on all the loops. So I'm going to go across like this. And we're just going to keep going in the same direction. And it's good to have a very bright light. I usually use an LED light when working. Or I like to use the natural sunlight, that's good too. If you're working in front of a window. Or to have an LED light right above where you're working. I'm going to go across all of the loops here. Now, it doesn't have to be straight because this square is going to stretch. So it doesn't have to be perfect because you realize that this one granny square is not going to have enough loops to go across all of here. So you'll be skipping some stitches. So for example, if I wanted to go across here and it's not perfectly even, I'm just, instead of doing exactly like that, I'm going to maybe move it a little bit forward in this direction. You may get a little bit of puckering, but you don't want to move and skip too many stitches. You know, it may be like every other one to be more precise. You could do that when you notice that you're going to have some stretching. Well, that's how I like to do it. That's the technique that I use. Like for example, if I don't want to do the whip stitch in this stitch, I'll just move it over to one over. I like the whip stitch. It is one of the easiest stitches to join together granny squares. Now, I like to do whip stitch also when I'm loom knitting dolls, when I'm putting the legs together on a doll or arms together. That works very nice. Okay, so now we're getting towards a corner here, and I did skip a stitch right here, and to get closer to that corner from the stitch from this corner to the stitch on the corner on the other square. And I'm just going to continue whip stitching in the same direction. And you're going to do this with, and you're going to go across the whole thing. Okay, so we have done most of the top, and then I'm going to go down here, whip stitch down, I'm going to whip stitch down, and then these two, and then going up. And you don't have to have your hat on a mannequin to do this. You can just do this with holding the hat with your hands. Both techniques work just as well. Okay, and I will see you at the end when I have this all stitched up. So we are going to talk now about the brim. And I have 3 examples of brims. This brim, which is a sunburst granny square hat, that is on my YouTube page, Tiffanys Crafts. All of the brims I'm going to show you are on my YouTube page. And this is a larger brim. And I have a pattern for a small brim and a large brim. And you can do your Shamrock Granny Square hat with this brim. And this brim is, the pattern is you're going to reattach your yarn from the base of your hat that you finished, which is about right here. You're going to chain 1, and you're going to SC, single crochet, in the front loops only. And then at the end of that row, you're going to slip stitch. In round 2, you're going to double crochet. And with this pattern, you're going to be increase in the first stitch. And then you're going to increase in every 6 stitches and slip stitch at the end of the round. In round 3, you're going to double crochet. You're going to chain 2, increase in the first stitch, and then you're going to increase every 5 stitches and then slip stitch at the end of the row. And in round 4, you're going to do double crochet, chain 1, increase in the first stitch, and then increase every 4 stitches and slip stitch at the end of the row. And then what I did, which is optional, is I added a pipe cleaner to this area here. I just sewed on a pipe cleaner to make the brim more flexible. And then I weaved it in between the stitches in the round. And then I wanted this brim to be stiff, so I added fabric stiffener. And I do have a video on how to add fabric stiffener to this brim. And this turned out very nice, and it has a nice look to it. And then I put a ribbon in between the hat and the brim, and I tied a bow to make it tighter, to fit tighter on the head. And then with the other 2 hats that I'm going to show you, the granny square hats, I used the small brim pattern. And I'm going to give you the pattern for the small brim and the large brim. And so with the small brim, there's 4 rounds. And round 1, I reattached the yarn about right here, and I did single crochet in the front loop only, and then I slip stitched at the end of the row. And then in round 2, which would be right here, I single crocheted and I increased in the first stitch. Then I increased every 6 stitches, and then I slip stitched at the end of the row. And in round 3, I did double crochet to make the stitches longer. So I chained 2 and I increased in the first stitch, and then I increased every 5 stitches, and I slip stitched at the end of the row. And in round 4, the last round, I did single crochet and I chained 1 and I increased in the first stitch, and then I increased every 4 stitches, and then I slip stitched at the end of the row. Now, in order to make this hat look kind of wavy, that's why I was single crocheting in the front loops. And with every round, you want to crochet in the front loops to get that nice look to it. And then this hat also has the same brim, the smaller one. Now, when you're looking at brims and you're thinking about the brim that you want to make for your hat, your single crochet is going to be shorter and your double crochet is going to be a longer stitch. And with the longer stitch comes a longer brim. So that's something that you want to think about. And if you don't want your hat to be kind of wavy and you want it to look more straight, you would not crochet in only the front loop, but you would want to do crochet in both loops. For round 1, I'm going to be doing the small brim pattern, and I just reattached the yarn and I'm going to chain 1. Okay, and I'm going to do single crochet in the front loop only. And then I'm going to slip stitch at the end of the row. And if you wanted this brim a little bit longer, the stitch, you can always do a half double crochet here or a double crochet. If you were going with the smaller brim pattern, but you wanted it a little bit longer, you would go with the half double crochet if you prefer that. Now with that other hat that I did with the larger brim, I wanted a larger brim because I wanted to use it as a sun hat to go birding, to bird watching. Now we are on round 2 of the brim, and I just finished round 1, and I did a single crochet. Now on round 2, we're going to be doing a single crochet. However, we're going to be doing some increases. So we're going to increase in the first stitch, and then we're going to be increasing in every 6 stitches. We're going to slip stitch at the end of the row. So the way that I'm going to do this is I'm going to increase the first stitch, and that's going to be the first increase of the 6 stitches. So to increase, I'm just going to do 2 single crochets in that stitch. And I'm going to put a stitch marker at the beginning of this row. I'm going to put it where I want to do the slip stitch at the end. So now I'm going to count from like 6, and then 5, 4, 3, 2, and then 1. I go to stitch number 1, then I'm going to do the increase. In the front loop. Now I'm ready to do round 3. And remember, at the end of the round, at round 2, you're going to want to slip stitch in the chain that you do. So I'm going to be doing round 3, and I'm going to be switching to a different color. I'm switching to the white, back to the white, because I want a bit of a striped look to it. So what I did was I did the first 2 rounds in green, and I'm going to do round 3 in white. So I'm just going to attach this white yarn to it. And the way that I like to attach it is to just knot it twice. Make sure it's on pretty good. Don't want that falling apart. So I'm going to chain 2. And as I had said a few minutes ago about the slip stitching, at the end of this round, I'm going to do a slip stitch where I had done the chain of 2. And I'm going to trim the green. So now the white will be my working yarn. And I'm just going to crochet that tail in. I had just finished round 3, and I had slip stitched in the chain of 2. And I like this green band here. It kind of gives it a little band to it. It's kind of cute. So I'm going to do round 4, and you can always change colors on the brim if you want, but if you do, you want to make sure that the yarn size is pretty close together. Like this is a size 3, and the green and the white is a size 3. I believe it is. Or it's a size 4. I'll have that written in the supplies and at the beginning of the video. So you want to make sure that they're close to the same thickness. So I'm going to do round 4, and I'm going to do it in the white. And when you're working on this band, you want to try it on. Make sure that it's the length that you want it, depending on how short or long that you want your brim to be. So I am doing round 4, and I'm going to do single crochet. And I'm going to do chain of 1, and then I'm going to increase in the first stitch. And then I'm going to be increasing every 4 stitches. I'm going to slip stitch at the end of the row, end of the round. And then I'm going to try it on and see if I like that. And if I want it longer, the brim longer, I'll make an additional round. If you feel that you want your brim only 4 rounds and you don't want to do a 5th, but you think that that what you're doing is too short, then increase your stitch to a half double crochet or double crochet. But for my pattern, I'm going to be doing a single crochet. So we're going to be chaining 1, and then we're going to increase a single crochet in the first stitch, working in the front loop. And to increase, you're just going to do 2 stitches in the first stitch. And then we're going to increase every 4 stitches. Okay, so I'm ready to increase again. All stitches are done in the front loop. I have quite a few hat tutorials on my YouTube page on granny squares and granny square hats, sunburst granny square hat, and then how to crochet a hat in the round, which is all double crochet. And I even have a hat done with knitting. If you enjoy knitting, I have that, and that is a very pretty hat that I did. And all those videos are on my YouTube page, Tiffanys Crafts. Okay, I'm going to increase here. If you like my photo down here, I took that picture in my garden. In my butterfly garden. And if you're wondering about that beautiful flower there in the picture, it's an allium, and at the end of the season, when it was done blooming, I had painted it blue. Just use spray paint. I like to do that Looks really pretty. And if you didn't put a stitch marker in at the beginning of the round, that's okay. What you're going to do is you're going to look at your hat and look at the length of it. And you can see where I started because this is shorter here than it is here. And that's how I know where I began the round. So at the end of this round, I am going to slip stitch in the chain of 2 from the previous round, and I'm going to knot it, and then I'm going to cut the working yarn, and I'm going to weave in the ends on the back side, and then the hat will be done. Thank you for watching, and I will show you what the hat looks like when it is completed. Alright, we had just finished the brim, and I slip stitched in the chain of 2 in the previous round. And I wanted to mention that my hat, the brim, is 2 inches. Now, if you wanted to make a hat and you wanted to do a brim and you wanted it to fold over, you would do it 4 inches and then you would fold it over. But I don't want my brim that big. So I'm going to cut the yarn and knot it. And I am going to double knot it. And then weave in the ends. I did try the hat on, made sure that that brim was as long as I wanted it to be. I'm going to use a yarn needle to weave in the ends. I like to weave in the ends because I think it gives a better finished look to it. Plus, if you were just to trim it right here, you would have a knot right there, and it would be kind of obvious that there was a knot right there. So if you weave in the ends, it's pulling that knot more towards the back side of the hat, and the knot won't be so obvious. So it just depends on what type of look that you want. You may want that knotted look if you were going to do some embroidery on the hat to make it look like a French knot. I was thinking about doing some embroidery on the hat, doing some French knots with some roses, just a few in front. Not quite sure yet if I want to do that. I'm still thinking about it. So with weaving in your ends, you don't have to go all the way, as long as your working yarn is. You can just, like for example, I'm just only going to here to where the green part is. And then I'm just going to trim it. And, you'll never see the end. And as far as washing goes, this, I wouldn't suggest it, especially if you're using two different colored yarns that are made out of two different materials. That wouldn't be a good idea, because if you put it in the washing machine, it would shrink different ways. One material might shrink more than a different type of material. So if you're going to wash this, I wouldn't suggest it, but if you have to, wash it in mild dishwasher soap and in a sink, and then you would dry it by putting it on like a mannequin head like that and letting it just dry, or you could blow up a balloon and then put the hat on the balloon. And I have never washed any of my hats. I wouldn't even consider it.